This is update for March 31, 2025, day 1132 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up since last video, I think was on March 24th. I'm just gonna do very quick update on the economic situation. Then we're gonna look at sort of more political, strategic, geostrategic, military situation around the world, and then we're going to switch to situation in Ukraine or between Ukraine and Russia. So starting with economic situation, I think there's not much to update except the same trend continues in every country we look, which is Europe keeps going with destruction of its industrial base. You probably have seen the blow up of the coal power generator, modern one, in Germany, in Hamburg. That was, I think, costed like 3 billion euros or US dollars. Don't remember the exact number. But the point was that that one is actually emitting very few harmful particles, let's put this way, because typical coal-fired power plant produces quite a bit of toxic particles, including actually radioactive. So typically they have spot around them about 10, 20, 30 kilometers of relatively elevated radiation, let's put this way. And so that was obviously important piece of asset that was blown up. Then in other news, you probably seen that United Kingdom stopped producing steel, and that happened through Chinese company acquiring this remaining UK steel producer, and then they shut it down. But again, all of this is happening is because of the governmental policies. This is not natural sort of economic free market developments. All of this are results of bureaucratic decisions in Europe, and bureaucracy essentially what happened across the West. And the worst situation is obviously in Europe generally, where the relatively free, we never had too free market, but relatively free market forces used to make economic decisions. There were some significant constraints, especially in Europe, through bureaucracy. But nevertheless, the major driving force was still free voluntary choices. That was over, I don't know, probably 20 years or so, replaced by essentially bureaucratic diktat in Europe specifically. And that's really destroying European economy and European society and culture as a whole. And then we just see this is just examples of that, where this brand new coal-fired power plant blown up, then the steel mill has been idle, last one remaining. So, and I'm sure there are more examples of that happening. So, economic situation remains sort of firmly on its course. We're basically trending in the same direction. In Europe, there's no changes. There's no reason to expect that things are going to get better. Even though in Germany, it seems that new party that came to power seem to be more reasonable. Less bureaucratic, but nevertheless, it doesn't seem so far. There's no indication in the change of course in Germany. Similar situations were going on in the US, but not as bad. And the new administration essentially trying to reverse the course. Whether they're going to be successful is a big question. I'm actually, the more time passes by, the less optimistic I become, because I don't see actual real meaningful moves in the right direction. There's no clear deregulation in the US economy, and therefore manufacturing is unlikely to come back, and just generally, that's not only about manufacturing, just generally ability to compete, competitiveness basically of both Europe and the US relative, let's say, to China is declining, and so the only positive I can say, at least US is trying to reverse the course. Europe is doubling down on the failed policy and basically digging deeper hole for itself. Otherwise, the economic trends continue the same in US. Then in China, things remain the same. Well, I mentioned before many times that China basically trying to plug huge capital destruction hole, black hole that they did through creating this consumer bubble, which includes real estate bubble, by earning money through exports. And so far, they are able to do this. The big question is obviously the tariffs, or what's going to happen. Reciprocal tariffs are absolutely a great idea. It's absolutely positive move for the US and generally for the world, because it actually helps to bring free trade and fair trade. And by fair, it really means free trade, because it forces other players to reduce the tariffs. Because to be fair, US had lowest tariffs, and many countries sort of abused that situation. Where there is a problem is just unilateral tariffs, sort of this 25% on I don't know, cars or something else, because it's not going to bring manufacturing to the US. It's going to create just problems and actually may destroy more manufacturing, because manufacturing is ecosystem. It's not just one thing, because it requires a supply chain, the manufacturers that supply to the bigger manufacturer. It's a truly ecosystem. The only way to create that ecosystem is to reduce regulations, and based on what I'm seeing, there's no indication that there is desire to that there are actual actual steps to reduce regulations in the US. So this sort of unilateral stuff is likely going to hurt US, obviously going to hurt everybody else. What is also this move? It actually also pushes gold to become actual money and replace US dollar. So it may sound counterintuitive, but tariffs are really a death for dollar, and then they force gold as a comeback of the gold as a global currency. And that's why you see on every new announcement of tariffs, as market becomes more sort of convinced that U.S. president is going to enact the unilateral tariffs, the price of gold goes up. Maybe that's a plan. I don't know. That I'm just speculating. It's possible that This is intentional, and maybe US wants to switch to gold standard, and meaning that the entire world is going to switch to the gold standard. Maybe that's a plan in the first place. I don't know, but that's where it's going. Now I'm going to switch to a little bit different topic, which is this whole situation in the Middle East and Near East and around Yemen. So what is happening is, I think US is pulling itself in the potential conflict where it's really almost impossible to win in a meaningful way, because first of all, Yemen is not that small. It's not a couple million people. It's close to 40 million people, which I think most people will be surprised. And Iran is another, I think, 90 million people. So this is a significant number of population. While Yemen is probably more unified, Iran is definitely have sort of suppressed civil war there, and so if there's enough pressure on the Iranian regime, there's big probability of this suppressed civil war become very like hot civil war, and essentially the regime there may be toppled. But that's big speculation. In case of Yemen, it's much more clear. The general population is unified there. The problem is that in order to call it win, you really need soldiers on the ground in, let's say, Yemen as the first target, I assume, and then Iran. And that really means, giving their number of population, this means really significant number of troops, and that's just simply unrealistic. So in other words, this kind of like a quick win, quick war is unlikely to happen, and for the US, and it's just going to be drawn out conflict where there is no clear winner, and things will sort of more or less remain the same unless there is significant, truly meaningful escalation, and there is sign of that. US brought, I think, between 5 to 10 bombers to island, to Diego Garcia Island. This is British Indian territory that potentially can be used against Yemen or Iran. Again, that is not gonna change. Even, let's say, they do their attacks, they bomb whatever they bomb. There's very hard to affect anything just simply with air force. That's the whole problem in this situation, and especially in case of Yemen, where there's really not much. You're probably going to be spending more bombing essentially nothing, or something that doesn't cost that much, and so it's going to be very bad economic exchange. So in some ways, that economic exchange will ensure that these attacks are self-defeating, and so this is what's happening there. Where it's all going to go is very unclear in this situation. Now I'm just going to move a little bit closer. Actually, I'm going to move to Ukraine and Russia. I think so far one thing is very clear, that neither Ukraine nor Russia want the ceasefire for different reasons. So first, in case of Russia, Russia is feeling that Ukraine is close to be failing, and so they just need to push a little bit more, and the society, the country will fall apart, and they will easily capture, I would say, whole of Ukraine. because the ultimate plan is to control all of the Ukraine. Russia doesn't need those just 5 regions, and 5 regions including Crimea. So it's not going to address declared by Russia actually their security concerns, because they claim that the potential Western troops or even Ukrainian troops are too close to Russia, to key regions of Russia. And if we look at the map, it's very clear that the most important region is Moscow, and Ukraine still controls this Sumy region, Kharkiv region, and Chernihiv region. So this is the threat, and Russia capturing this 5 regions is not going to address that threat. So that really explains that the plan is, if, let's say, Russia cannot get the whole of the Ukraine, get these 5 regions, which makes Ukraine incapable to continue as a state that can defend itself. Not to mention that that's going to create a huge internal conflict in Ukraine. That 1917 moment of civil war, or sort of cold civil war. So then the next attack by Russia will be will result in pretty quick destruction of the remaining Ukraine. This is again the same thing that happened during the division of Poland in the 18th century. So there were 3 divisions of Poland, so just first a little bit, then more, and then the final blow. So this is essentially the same path. Russia couldn't get, well, it was 3 countries at the time, they couldn't get, conquer Poland immediately, so they decided to essentially, do it in drawn out way. So this is the same. If Russia cannot capture all of Ukraine immediately, this is going to happen over several iterations, and potentially just one more iteration, and that's it. So that's a Russian position. They wanted to continue. For Ukraine, Ukraine is in a position where it has no room to retreat, basically, because it's very clear that losing these 5 regions makes Ukraine not viable country, especially from a national security perspective. So there's no choice in this case. Also, in terms of Ukrainian presence, so there's this was push to have elections in Ukraine, because from legal perspective, Ukrainian president is illegitimate and Ukrainian parliament is illegitimate because their terms has expired. So there's big question about their legitimacy. At the same time, this sort of initial push kind of like stalled. First of all, Russia realized that if there's election, most likely it's going to be current Ukrainian president who's going to be re-elected, unless General Zaluzhny decides to participate in election, and then he's going to be elected. And that's actually going to be even worse for Russia. So basically, from Russia perspective, it's either it's going to be the same or even worse. So there's no hope that there will be some pro-Russian candidate who's going to win. That's not going to happen. And so that's why Russia decided to propose this UN control over Ukraine, hoping that will allow to somehow push pro-Russian candidate in some way, and basically remove current Ukrainian president. From U.S. perspective, I think current U.S. administration also realizing that it's either current Ukrainian president, which obviously they don't like, or it's going to be General Zaluzhny, which is probably also is going to be even worse. So that's why this whole idea push for political sort of update in Ukraine it's kind of stalled, and obviously current Ukraine president doesn't want any elections. He's happy with the status quo. There's no question about it. And so this is kind of like this whole situation where what this really means, there's objective reasons for this conflict, for this war, for this fight. And it seems that unfortunately, the only way to resolve this issue is actually through this fight, until one of the sides loses and decided to capitulate. And that's really where it's heading. And that's what I'm saying is without involving European troops, which I don't think is going to happen, because you probably need like 200,000-300,000 people, and I don't think Europe is prepared for that. So that's why this sort of the path of least resistance for this war, for this conflict, is to continue the conflict, at least for right now. And so, from that perspective, U.S. will try to put the pressure, but I don't think there is enough economic leverage or any kind of leverage that U.S. has to stop both sides. So that's just sort of where how it's all developing. And actually, I want to mention some interesting information about the wounds, about sort of military medicine, and it's actually coming from the Russian Journal of Military Medicine. So they had article discussing sort of their observations in terms of wounds and so on, and severity. So I just want to quickly sort of go over some high-level information, highlights. There's quite a bit of detail. I'm not going to go into that, but this table actually shows type of wounds, and bullets are only 2.2%. Then actually, let me actually switch to different. Sorry, actually this table is actually more helpful when I want to. So so this is again going by the type of source of the wound. So small arms, or basically rifles, machine guns, and all of that is only 4%. Then artillery is 20%, 20.5 to be exact. And then the most of it is UAVs, and two parts is dropping all of this explosives from UAVs, and then also kamikaze drones. So that really is 75.5% of all of the wounds. So just kind of gives you example how things change, because typically artillery would be the major source of the wounds, and as you can see, it's actually not. So the main sort of the queen of the battlefield are all of this UAVs at this point, and they become the dominant force and actually the deadliest force on the battlefield. So the artillery is becoming distant second place, and small arms are essentially negligible. And then in terms of how heavy the wounds are, so the light ones are 72.26%, medium ones are 8.52%, the heavy or difficult ones 17.96%, or roughly 18%, and extremely heavy is 1.26%. So essentially, heavy wounds are roughly 20%, medium ones only 8.5%, and essentially we can say 70% are light ones, 10% are medium, and 20% are heavy, which I think is kind of a little bit counterintuitive in terms of distribution between the medium ones and heavy. So as you can see, you would expect that medium one's going to be, so let's say it would be 20 medium and 10 heavy. It actually sort of turned around where there's it's actually surprisingly significant number of heavy wounds as a general, 20% out of the, out of that number. And then also this authors looked at the what parts of the body is most frequently hit. So the head is 11%, then neck is 0.7, chest 8.9, the stomach area 3.7%, then sort of bottom of the torso 2.2%, and then the legs, arms, or hands is 58.2, and then backbone 0.8. So it's very interesting that most of the wounds, or let's say 60%, are in the legs and hands, which, if you look at the soldiers on the battlefield, that's what the least protected. So it's actually, let's say, typically the chest is most protected, and also stomach area, but that's, let's say, 12, 14, I would say 13% of the whole number, and then head is 11%. So it's, what is very clear is that the areas that got hurt the most, they are protected the least. So it's clearly tells that current equipment of individual protective equipment of the soldier is completely inadequate on both sides, because they are exactly the same on both sides. Now let's actually look at the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north and northeast. So essentially at this point, situation with this whole excursion of Ukrainian troops into Kursk region is over. Russian troops essentially control everything. There's not really much of the Russian desire to basically do the same excursion into Ukrainian territory. So I think this situation will stabilize across the state borders, and I don't think there's much going to be going on there. The next one is Kharkiv region. So here Russian troops do hold their bridgeheads, which indicates that they eventually would like to launch a large-scale attack on Kharkiv, which I mentioned before. That's really important city for Russia to capture, and I'm sure that that's in the plans. The next one is North Lugansk section of the front line. Things here more or less stable, not sort of ideal. There are small losses, but by Ukrainian side, but there's not much sort of to show or mention here in terms of any even like major villages here. Then let's move south to North Donbass. Here in the northern part, there are some sporadic attacks by Russian troops. So, for example, there was one from Bilogorivka towards Serebranka. So far, they failed, and the Ukrainian forces are holding ground here more or less firmly. Then, in the southern part, things also more or less stable, not as stable as up north. Russian troops still cannot push out Ukrainian forces out of Chasiv Yar. Still, Ukrainian forces control southwestern and western parts of Chasiv Yar. And also Russian attack around Donetsk so far stalled as well. So things here more or less call it okay for Ukraine, at least for now. Then let's move to the central Donbass front line. The northern part around Pokrovsk is more or less essentially stabilized. The southern sort of part of it is less stable, and Ukraine forces slowly retreating in this area between Velyka Novosilka and then Alexeyevka, this whole area. Let's just look a little bit more. This is from March 15, situation around Pokrovsk. The only difference then is that Russian troops essentially captured this village Pischane. So they are basically on the outskirts of the village Zvirova. So essentially that's the only loss by Ukrainian forces since then in this area. Otherwise, situation, as I stated, relatively stable here, especially if to compare to what was going on here, let's say more than a month ago. Now let's look at the situation south of Pokrovsk. So Ukrainian forces, most importantly, lost this village Rozlyv. So at this point, Russian troops are attacking Alexeyevka and Bogatyr as the next targets. There are attacks towards Kotlyarivka, so essentially there are attacks in this area. So far they are not successful. And then there is Russian pressure between Vesela and Vilnipole, so in the direction, obviously, this northwestern direction. That's, I would say, the most dangerous area for Ukraine, where there is, let's say, opportunity for Russian troops. It remains to be seen, but this is where it may sort of crack here for Ukraine, or Ukraine defenses may crack there. This is where it used to be on the 28th. As you can see, there's not much of a progress by Russian side since then. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. There were some sporadic attacks by Russian troops around Kharkiv, but no, they did not achieve much. So things more or less remain stable. I think there was just distraction attack, just probing Ukrainian defenses here. Now let's move to the front line along the Dnipro River. Situation remains the same. Nothing changed here. Also, sporadic Russian attempts to establish bridgehead on the western side of Dnipro River, so far without any success. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.